Local Justice, presented by Elrod Bobe Law Firm, serving our community since 1980. Here's your host, attorney Ben Leader.
Welcome to Local Justice. Today we're honored to sit down with B.J. Barrowclough, the Chief Public Defender for the 16th Judicial Circuit here in South Carolina. B.J. has been a voice for the voiceless for nearly 30 years, in defending those who cannot afford representation of their own, working every day to ensure the promise of justice equally applies to everyone in our community and not just those who can afford it. B.J., thank you so much for joining us. It's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Well, let's dive right in and let the viewers get to know you a little bit. Could you just tell us a little bit about your background, where you grew up, and what ultimately led you towards this path of being involved in the law?
Sure. So originally I am from New Jersey, and I went to college at the University of Virginia, got a bachelor's in psychology, and then went to law school at Boston College Law School. When I graduated law school, well, while I was in school, my mother had passed away, and my father moved to Lancaster, South Carolina. So my girlfriend at the time, who would later become my wife, she and I moved to South Carolina when we graduated law school, and I started working in the public defender office. And it's funny, you know, being a public defender, being on this side of the courtroom, you know, I feel like in hindsight that God led me there. And I say that because in law school I knew I wanted to be in court, and I was interested in criminal law, but I would have done either side. And you know, the summer after my 2L year, I applied for internships at DA's offices and public defender office. I got the Cambridge Public Defender Office, Cambridge, wow, Massachusetts. Then my 3L year, when they had clinicals, I applied for both prosecution side and defense side. And I got defense side, and I was assigned to Dorchester District Court. And I had some great experiences there. And then when I graduated law school, I applied, of course, back in '95, like, you may not know this, or maybe you do know this, but the job market was really tight for lawyers. And I applied at every prosecutor's office and every public defender's office in both the Carolinas, because I took, wow, both bars. And even though, ironically, I had interviews in the 6th Circuit Solicitor's Office and the 16th Circuit Solicitor's Office, neither one of them offered me a job, and then I did get this job in the public defender office. So at every fork in the road, it always led me to this side. But now, you know, 30 years later, I can look back and say that this was where I was meant to be. Absolutely.
And so 1995 was when you first joined the public defender's office here in York County?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
And who was the chief public defender then?
Then it was Gerald Smith.
Okay.
And Harry Dess was the deputy.
Okay.
And then in '97, Harry became the chief public defender just for York County, because we didn't go to a circuit system until 2008. But Harry became the chief public defender in '97, and then in 2002 is when Harry made me his deputy. And then I was his deputy for 17 years.
And Harry's been a prior guest on the show, phenomenal attorney, love chatting with Harry, think a lot of him and look up to him a lot. What was it like to be able to learn from him and work with him for so many years?
Oh, I mean, it was a great experience. Certainly he has been he's one of my best friends, but also a mentor to me. You know, in my early years, in the '90s, you know, almost every big case he did, he brought me in as second chair. And then, you know, of course, size of the office then, I had to start doing my own big cases as first chair at the same time. So it was kind of like learn as you go. But then, you know, through the 2000s and stuff, pretty much every big case in the office, either I was lead counsel and he helped me, or he was lead counsel and I helped him. And, you know, it was a great experience.
That's fantastic. So you got comfortable with bigger cases, a lot at stake at kind of early in your career.
Yes, I did. Yes, I did.
Absolutely. And did you work on the prosecuting side at any point throughout school?
So my wife and I had our first child in 1999. And at that time, she wanted to be closer to her family in Pennsylvania. So, you know, we left and moved up there. And that's the only time where I applied for jobs and I got a prosecution job. There was a newly elected district attorney in 2000 named Dave Lupus who hired me, and I started there in February of 2000. We stayed up there a year and a half, determined we liked it better down here, and in July of 2001, we moved back here, and Harry basically hired me back. But I had a year and a half as a prosecuting attorney, and it's a funny story. I think it's funny. Working up there was a very high-profile double murder case that came into the office. Dave Lupus did not have a lot of experience, even though he was the elected DA, and there had been a lot of turnover with his election. They didn't have really many experienced trial attorneys trying a murder case. So even though I was new in the office, because I had defended murder cases in South Carolina, they put me on the case with an experienced attorney named Michelle Olszewski. And she and I put together this big trial. The case had been featured on America's Most Wanted 2 times before they caught these individuals. And we tried the case. One of them pled guilty. We tried the other one. And secured a guilty verdict. He got a life sentence. And in Pennsylvania, what they have is the state police and the attorney general, they award awards annually for the best investigator of the year and the best prosecution team of the year. And for that case, I got to go to Harrisburg with Dave and Michelle and Tom McAndrew, who's the investigator who made that case. And we received those awards. I still have a letter of commendation in my office. But what's funny about that is, in this job, I go back to the public defender office, and solicitors and public defenders, we argue, like, oh, you don't know how hard we have. We don't get discovery. Our clients are unreasonable. And solicitors are like, you don't know how hard we have it. Victims are unreasonable. We have to. And I'm like, it's not that hard. I did it for 1 year and got prosecuted a year for the state of Pennsylvania. Don't tell me it's hard.
That's great. That's great. When it comes to the idea of justice and the thought of justice, I think few lawyers out there deal with it on the front lines on a daily basis as much as someone in the public defender's office in your role. And anybody that I know that has chosen to go down that line of work, truly views it as a calling, not just a job. And I think you have to believe in the system and believe in justice to want to do that every day. There's a quote we constantly heard in law school, and I think it dates back maybe to even England before that, which is that it's better for 100 guilty men to go free than one innocent man suffer. I'd just like to hear your thoughts on that and whether you think that principle still rings true today.
Well, it's funny that you say that, because I think the quote is actually 10 guilty people go free than one innocent person suffer. And I do a presentation about public defender and the criminal justice system, the importance of the Constitution, that I've done. I do it for York County Citizens Academy every year. I've done it for like TK Lions Club. I do it for Fort Mill Rotary Club. Just anyone who invites me, I do it. And I start with that.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, because that did come from England. And then that quote, I think it was Blackstone, and then Benjamin Franklin picked up that quote. And when they were doing the Constitutional Convention that resulted in the first 10 amendments, it said that Benjamin Franklin was quoted saying that too in his arguments over, the First Amendment, the Fourth Amendment, Fifth, Sixth. So it was, it's ironic that you pulled that out, because I use it all the time.
Yeah, and we didn't plan that at all.
No, we didn't.
That's great, and that's one of the quotes that still sticks with me all through law school. And I would think that would be the forefront of most public defenders' mindset.
Absolutely. I mean, we have a free society, and I believe that every individual, whether they're wealthy or whether they're poor, has the right to go about their business free from governmental interference, unless all the constitutional safeguards are complied with in the interest of public safety, that somebody's freedom does get curtailed by a stop, by a search, by an arrest, by an incarceration, But all those safeguards are put in place for a reason. This isn't an autocracy. This isn't a dictatorship. And so, on the front lines, obviously being a public defender, we defend the people who can't afford lawyers because they're indigent. Those people have less power in society. So those people are the people that are more likely to get steamrolled by overreaching government. So, we kind of stand in the bulwarks to defend their rights, and by defending their rights, we protect everybody's rights. And, studies show pretty much consistently, not just here too, but everywhere, that normally public defenders handle about 70% of the caseload of what we call here general sessions court, but felony court everywhere. And so, we're doing it for the weakest, and we're also doing it for the biggest volume, and I think that's the most important part of why we do what we do, is to keep the Constitution meaningful and to keep our society free.
That's great. That's great insight and directly on point. And I want to dive a lot deeper into that in this next segment. We're going to take a quick break for our sponsors, and then we'll be right back with more local justice here shortly. Thank you all for tuning in.
As soon as I contacted Elrod Pope, they handled everything. Without Elrod Pope's help, I'd have been paying hospital bills for years to come. Elrod Pope just took the stress and they put it on their table and took it off mine.
Coming to Elrod & Pope, I didn't have to worry about anything. Everything was taken care of. It put me in a real calm state because I had someone on my side. I knew that I was in the right hands. It felt great.
Welcome back to Local Justice. I'm Ben Leader, and today I'm honored to be here with the Chief Public Defender of the 16th Judicial Circuit, B.J. Barrowclough. B.J., thanks again for joining us.
Well, thank you again for having me.
Yeah, I want to dive right back into that last conversation. You know, we were talking about the quote that dates back to Benjamin Franklin and even prior to that. You know, I'd like to hear your thoughts on how you balance compassion for your clients, but also accountability to the system and to the community, you know, in your role.
Well, you know, as defense attorneys, you know, we take an oath to zealously represent our clients. That, of course, does not mean that we would do anything unethical, like lie or hide evidence or anything like that, but to fight as absolutely hard as we can for our clients. And when you touch on the word compassion, you know, I speak at Public Defender 101, which is a class for new public defenders. And, you know, when I'm talking to them about, like, what's the most important part of being a public defender, and it's not knowledge of the law, and it's not even really trial skills. It's really having a heart for people. You know, our clientele comes to us with a multitude of problems. First of all, obviously they're indigent or they wouldn't be our clients, so they have financial difficulties. But also a lot of them have mental health difficulties, drug abuse problems, housing insecurity, violence in the home, all kinds of problems. And, you know, their legal problem is just usually an outgrowth of those problems, but it's just one of the things they're dealing with. So in order to really effectively help those people, you know, you have to try to care about all those things at the same time. We can't solve every problem, but we have to try to solve the problems that we can. And to do that, you have to care in the first place. So, you know, and a lot of times, as I'm sure you know, most of the people charged with crimes do not go to trial. Most of the time, it's either a guilty plea or dismissal or diversion program. But out of those results, you know, even if it's a guilty plea, we're trying to minimize the damage to their life. You know, if it's a situation where we can get them to not have a felony on their record, as that might impact their ability to get, you know, food stamps, SNAP, housing, stuff like that, then we're going to try to do that. If there are resources available through probation for them to get, you know, mental health treatment or drug treatment, batterers counseling, whatever the case may be, we're going to do that. You know, it's a matter of trying to connect your client with as much help as you can in every individual case. Now, that being said, when you talk about balancing it with, you know, the system, you know, we're reasonable people. You know, obviously, any case with a victim, we care about the victims, but, you know, that's what the solicitor's for. That's why we have the negotiation process and the give and take. You know, a lot of times, you know, if we work to make the victim whole, then our clients get a better sentence. Unfortunately, a lot of times making the victim whole involves money, which my clients don't have. I think that's something private attorneys avail themselves more when they have clients who can afford to make their victims whole. But, you know, the other component to the system, and this applies to me much more as the chief public defender than it does to individual public defenders, is that, you know, we have an obligation and responsibility, you know, to keep the system moving, for the system to work efficiently. You know, and ever since COVID, you know, there was when the courts were mostly closed. In York County, they never completely closed. In York County, we held court for people who were incarcerated all through COVID. But many counties did not. And even in York County, we didn't have jury trials for over a year. So things backed up, and there became this gigantic backlog across the state. And, you know, the state legislature has done a real good job of allocating resources to the solicitors and to us to be able to attack that backlog. And I think statewide, it has gone down significantly over the last 4 or 5 years. But, you know, we attacked the backlog because it's just not fair to people, to defendants or victims, for the cases to linger on for 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, especially for the defendants in jail. But even for the ones not in jail, having a charge, especially a serious charge, hanging over your head for 3 years impacts your ability to do anything, to travel, to take jobs in different states, to go out of state to visit family, to do anything, to get housing. So, you know, we have an obligation to the system to try to also make things work as efficiently as possible. And here in York County, I think, not to brag, but I think the numbers back up, we do a better job than anywhere else in South Carolina. We have totally gotten rid of our backlog in York County. And we do move more cases than we bring in most months. And by we, I mean the public defender office, but I also mean the entire system, the solicitor's office too. And I think that, other counties, at least, from a macro view, from what the legislature looks at, from what the Supreme Court looks at, other counties look to us in the way that we efficiently handle the caseload and attack the backlog to be an example that other counties try to follow.
That's great. A very efficient system is good for everybody. The
Right.
prosecution, the defense, the victim,
Right.
Everybody involved.
And going to what you said about balancing, that's where the balancing comes in, because I want to do everything that I can to help my individual client as much as possible, which a lot of times involves not rushing. But then as the boss, I also want to make sure we have an efficient system. So there's that tension there between we got to do everything we can for this person, but we also can't be lazy. We also have to move these cases through the system.
Right. So often it seems that the focus on justice is so one-sided on the victims, which rightfully so, they deserve justice, but there's also this whole other side of the coin on the, what you deal with, on the suspects, and we haven't always gotten it right. The public opinion isn't always right. There's been wrongful convictions, there's been, wrongful
Sure.
detentions, and so preserving justice is not just a one-way street, for victims. It's for both sides to make sure everybody gets a fair shake.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And the other truth of the matter is that for a certain subset of people, and again, these are people who have problems that really need help, one week they're a victim, the next week they're a defendant. The
Right.
next week they might be a victim again, the next week they might be a defendant again. And, that makes it incumbent upon us and the solicitors to try to get people the help that they need so that in the future they'll be neither a victim or a defendant.
Right. Well, we want to dive into that a little deeper in the last segment, so we're going to take another quick break, and we'll be right back with more local justice with BJ Barrowclough. Thanks again for joining us.
As soon as I contacted Elrod Pope, they handled everything. Without Elrod Pope's help, I'd have been paying hospital bills for years to come. Elrod Pope just took the stress and they put it on their table and took it off mine.
Coming to Elrod Pope, I didn't have to worry about anything. Everything was taken care of. It put me in a real calm state because I had someone on my side. I knew that I was in the right hands. It felt great.
Welcome back to Local Justice. I'm Ben Leader, and today we're sitting down with BJ Barrowclough, the Chief Public Defender here in York and Union County. BJ, thanks again for being with us. Really appreciate your insight.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. So I want to talk about, public defense work in general can be very hard on a lot of days. It's heavy work. You've got a lot hanging over your head in terms of, what's hanging over your client's head. 30 years of doing this, what motivates you each and every day to wake up and keep doing what you're doing?
Well, what motivates me is that I'm blessed to really just have a heart for people. Like, I really do want to help each individual client that I have personally or that comes into our office. And like I said previously, I do also care about the system, defending the Constitution for everybody. But also, I want to say the other side of the coin is I've been blessed with a wonderful family. I got a great wife. I have 4 amazing kids who are mostly grown now, but through most of those 30 years, they were growing up. So I was able, when I left work, I was able to leave work at work. Now, sometimes, of course, if you are preparing for a trial, you might be working nights and weekends. You can't leave work at work. But I mean, on the day in, day out, when I'm home, I'm home. And like, my kids kept me so busy, but busy doing fun things and fulfilling things, that like I didn't have the type of situation that I think some public defenders have where, things that happen at work eat at them when they're not at work.
Right.
Like, I was always both busy and fulfilled by my family to where I didn't really have that problem.
That's great. It's not always easy to kind of hang it up at the door, but it's necessary to be able to do what you've done for as long as you've been able to do it.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And from a funding side of things, I know you mentioned that recently, the funding for both sides from the legislature. You don't hear a lot of people campaign on we want to fund the public defender's office more, and is funding a constant battle that y'all are facing, and do you feel like you have the resources given the growth in York County and kind of the surge that we're seeing here?
Well, I will say this. I think, nationwide and even in a lot of counties in this state, funding is an issue. And of course, there are things that I'd like for our office to have that we can't afford. but both the state of South Carolina, the legislature, has done a real good job of understanding two things. One, the importance of public defense work in defending the Constitution, because we do have a legislature, I think, that mostly cares about the Constitution. And two, the fact that the caravan can only move as fast as the slowest camel. And most of the time, the slowest camel is the defense side in a criminal case. So the legislature has done a real good job of funding us at a level to where we can keep up with the solicitors, if you will. Like I said, we do about 70% of the caseload. Therefore, mathematic-wise, we should get about 70% of the funding. And on the state side, we do. Now, here in York County and Union County, we don't get 70% of what the solicitors get. But, York County has been extremely good to us. We have, and I'm sure you know this living here, but our county management team is phenomenal, from Josh Edwards to Kevin Madden to Becky Esper in finance, even Lisa Davis in dealing with personnel and HR matters. I mean, we have a great management team. They're always responsive to what we need, not necessarily maybe luxury items, but to what we need, to where, I feel like we're better off here than in most places in the state, and probably even most places nationally. We do a real good job. Now, the solicitor's office, one change that I'd like to see that I feel like will never happen is that the solicitor's office has a lot of areas of funding, what we jokingly call slush funding, but funding where they get money from all these different sources, like pretrial intervention, from drug court, from check court, from domestic violence court, and all these things. And that money that they get, their position is, well, we run the program, which is true. But we do a lot of the work to get the clients into the program, depending which program it is. Some of them, we monitor them and help them through the program. And I feel like if that money were accounted for, that we should get a share of that money, which currently we don't get any of that money. And, like I said, because the state and the county do take good care of us as far as our lawyers go, our what I would call our core needs with regards to lawyers and investigators, those are met. But some public defender offices like Charleston, I know, they have a social worker on staff, somebody who, like I said, help the clients, beyond just their legal problem, but connect them with housing, connect them with services, to be able to have a social worker on staff, to really help our clients in such a way that they'd be less likely to reoffend as well. We could afford a social worker if we could get some of that diversion program money or some of that bad check court money or something like that. I think that's in an idealized world. I don't necessarily see the solicitors ever voluntarily giving that up, and I don't see the legislature taking on the political force of the solicitors to change the law in that way. But we can dream.
Yeah, that's a great point, and you never know. And I think a lot of times people are looking at taxpayer dollars, and that's a conversation that a lot of people like to have. But by running an efficient system, you're saving taxpayer dollars by not having people sit in jail for 2 or 3 years when their case could be adjudicated much sooner. That's
Absolutely.
a win-win for everybody.
And I'll tell you, we have a jail team here, a jail program that actually Harry Dess started. We were the first public defender office in the state to have one. Now I think about 5 or 6 of the big counties have them, where we had one attorney. Originally it was one attorney, now it's 2 attorneys and investigators, but originally it was one attorney dedicated to talking to people as soon as within the first 48 hours that they were brought into the jail. And if it was a small case, we would fast track that case, meaning that we get expedited discovery, expedited plea negotiations, and try to get something done to get them out of jail as soon as possible. If it's a bigger case or a case that doesn't lend itself to being fast tracked, there's still a lot of value in identifying things that need to be done in the case right away, like if discovery needed to be preserved, like a video from a QT, or if the person had mental health difficulties, we need to get an evaluation done. We can get that done in an expedited fashion. There are a lot of things, even for non-fast track cases, that get the cases, moving quicker. But with regards to the fast track cases, what we did was we came up with a way to track the number of days that those people were in detention versus if we didn't have the program, how many days would they have been in detention. So we picked what was a somewhat arbitrary point, but a point pretty early on in the process, what used to be called the bond returnable date, now it's called the second appearance date. And however many days they got out before that date, we would calculate that number of days times the amount of dollars it costs to keep them in jail a day, and we would come up with a figure. And the first year we did that program, we were in the hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Wow.
And we did that every year because the York County took a chance, invested on that position, and we were showing them this really pays off. And it's expanded. Got to the point where county managers were like, you don't have to show us anymore. So we stopped keeping track of those statistics. But as you know, last year we had a new county manager, Josh Edwards, so I wanted him to see. So for last year, we did do the statistics again. And now with a 2-attorney team, we're at over $3 million saved as far as how much it costs to keep an inmate in jail for a day times the number of days that got out before second appearance.
Wow, that is fascinating, and that's putting data to great use to be able to prove, how effective that program is.
Right.
We could talk all day. I would love to have you back again just because I've got so many questions I'd love to hear your thoughts on. But kind of to wrap things up for this segment, what do you think the future of public defense looks like, and what is the greatest challenge ahead of y'all?
Well, I think the greatest challenge, at least right now, and the way things are going, is that, things in society, this is my perspective, have gotten more dangerous. The fact that, the Supreme Court rulings with regards to guns and the inability of legislatures to regulate guns are everywhere now. And when I was, first being a public defender in the 90s, what used to be a fight and lesser charges is now a shooting and greater charges. The number of homicides has gone up. The number of attempted murders has gone up because everything involves guns, which makes all the charges more serious, which makes obviously the stakes higher, and there just be more work to be done on every individual case.
Sure.
So that's one challenge. Then the other challenge, as I'm sure you're aware, is fentanyl, which again, when I first started, everything was crack cocaine. Crack cocaine's the worst. Crack cocaine, and they passed all these draconian laws with mandatory minimums and trafficking with these huge penalties for crack cocaine. Well, now crack cocaine, it's like people sneeze at it, because fentanyl's so much more dangerous. Fentanyl's dangerous even to people, the officers who are trying to collect it when they make a bust. I mean, it's so dangerous. But there again, then what do we have? We have a furor where people are so upset that they pass all these draconian laws. And, I will say, because I did think about this, the fact that we passed all the trafficking fentanyl laws and have these huge mandatory minimums and huge maximums, on the one hand, it has done a good job of, taking, people who truly traffic in fentanyl, the people with the pill presses, off the streets. I think there are a lot less now than there was 2 years ago. But the cost of that is we have prosecuted and convicted to catch those. For every one pill press true fentanyl trafficker we caught, I feel like 25 other people with fentanyl problems who just happen to have the weight, because they are set artificially low, in my opinion, the weight to be prosecuted as traffickers, got prosecuted as traffickers, and got a lot more time than what I think they need, but also that I think is even good for society. The amount of money we're going to spend to warehouse these people who really just have drug problems. So it cuts both ways.
Sure.
They swung with a big bat, and they did hit hard a lot of the actual traffickers, but they also hit hard a ton of other people. But because fentanyl's so dangerous, I don't see, there being a swing back the other way.
Right.
And therefore, every fentanyl case is also just, the stakes are so high, which again, makes it so much pressure, makes it so much work.
You remind us that justice is not just a destination or an idea, it's a fight every single day. And
Absolutely.
It requires people like you making that daily sacrifice for us. And so thank you for joining us on the show. Thank you for all you do for keeping the dignity of our accused and humanity in general. And we appreciate you and your leadership and your role. And York County's lucky to have you as the public defender.
Well, thank you so much for hosting me. And I really enjoyed this conversation we had, and I look forward to having another one.
Sounds like a plan. Thank you all for tuning in to another episode of Local Justice. Thank you to BJ Barrowclough for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Stay safe out there.
As soon as I contacted Elrod Pope, they handled everything. Without Elrod Pope's help, I'd have been paying hospital bills for years to come. Elrod Pope just took the stress and they put it on their table and took it off mine.
Coming to Elrod Pope, I didn't have to worry about anything. Everything was taken care of. It put me in a real calm state because I had someone on my side. I knew that I was in the right hands. It felt great.